it is Monday evening, July 27th. This is a special meeting of the Guilford Board of Education. We are meeting tonight to talk about the school reopening plan. This was a plan that was sent out to the Guilford Public Schools community, I believe last night, via email from our wonderful Lori Hahn, who is constantly keeping us all up on important communications. As noted in the plan, it gives 3 different designs for 3 different possible approaches, depending on a number of things, including transmission in the state. I simply want to start out and thank Dr. Freeman and all of the Guilford Public Schools staff that is putting an enormous amount of time and careful thought into this document, and continues to put a lot of time and careful thought into the reopening in general. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Freeman and allow him to introduce this plan to us.
Thank you, Dr. Balistraci. What I hope to do is accomplish an overview of the plan fairly quickly, and Mr. Bowden and Dr. Crystal will be helping us to do that, and then go ahead and open up this to a conversation among the board members to talk about what's in the plan and to answer questions about what is in the plan. I do want to note for the community that we will be having a second conversation at the same time tomorrow evening, in which we will be entertaining questions from the community at large, as well as from the board members that we are entertaining questions from tonight. Like Dr. Balistraci, I want to start by thanking everybody who put an enormous amount of time into the plan that we will be discussing tonight. Dr. Crystal and Mr. Bowden led 2 different teams that did significant work to pull this plan together. All of our 12-month administrative staff, all of our principals have worked diligently on this plan. Teachers have volunteered their time to be part of the work going into this planning. The work has been informed by the surveys that we have completed and by the focus groups that we have conducted. And so I want to thank all of the parents who have shared their good thinking and thoughts that have gone into this plan. And then, like Dr. Balistraci, I want to thank Lori Hahn for all of her work in pulling this together and in creating the document that we will be looking at this evening. I want to go ahead and share my screen while we're having this conversation so that we can be looking at the same pieces of information as we're having this conversation. Again, for community members, I want to note that the plan that we will be discussing here with the board and that I will be scrolling through as we talk is available on our website. And so anybody at home who wants to take a look at this plan, who wants to follow tonight's conversation, can find a copy of this plan on our Guilford Public Schools website. It is the lead news item on our website today. I would also, I just want to note, and I guess I'll begin by moving through the document. I think the most important sentence in this entire document falls at the very end of the first paragraph. The last sentence in the first paragraph in this document notes that this is a living and evolving document. Since we made the document publicly available last evening, I've received a number of emails wanting to know about how we came to this point or about the decision that we've made. It's really, really important to understand what this document is and how this document works. First, this is a district level plan. This is a very broad plan that addresses all 7 of our schools and all 13 of our grade levels. It is not specific to any one individual school, location, grade level, or class of students. Secondly, the document does overview 3 different phases or 3 different models of instruction. And so as we continue to move forward through this summer, which is becoming very, very short, this one overview plan will in effect be continued to be developed into 21 different plans. We need to know what those 3 different phases will look like in each of our 7 schools. And while there may be some similarities between and among the elementary schools, there are also unique things about each of those elementary schools. And clearly the planning at the high school will need to be different than it is at our middle level schools or at our elementary schools. So again, there is much work and much detail yet to be completed. And again, this document is not a final document. It was due to the state on the 24th as an update. It is clearly going to be an evolving document. It is based on 50 pages of guidance that the state of Connecticut released several weeks ago. Those 50 pages were full of general directions that will require clarification from the state. We have received some of that clarification. We're still working on receiving more of that clarification. And those 50 pages of guidance were full of decisions and positions that are open to further discussion and conversation. So not only will this document change and evolve as we continue to monitor our health numbers and as we continue to look at the spread of the virus in Connecticut, or the lack of the spread of virus in Connecticut, but also as parts of the plan are clarified or challenged, we will need to be responsive to those changes as well. To illustrate that point, there was a press conference held by the governor at 4 o'clock this evening, which seems to have significantly changed some of the expectations going into this plan. As we went into this plan and submitted it on Friday afternoon, it was very clear that the state was requiring full days, 5 days a week, 177 days of in-person schooling offered to all students in every community in Connecticut. It appears following this press conference that there will be now some local flexibility entered into that expectation. It is unclear at this time if that flexibility extends to all levels or only to the high school level, and if it extends to shifting into the hybrid model or all the way into the distance learning model for the high school. So while we know there's been change, we need to clarify exactly what the parameters of that change will be. And finally, I want to be clear that this document, this decision, this plan must continue to evolve because we've simply provided it. And while there's been a lot of involvement in the development of this plan, not everybody in this community has participated in the development of this plan. And I expect that there will be questions and thoughtful questions that come from community members as they read this document. I will expect that there will be suggestions and probably really thoughtful and creative suggestions that we missed in the creation of this document. And we leave ourselves open to answering those questions and listening to that feedback and receiving those creative suggestions, because if there's a better way of addressing something, then we're open to receiving that better way of addressing something. And finally, we have labor agreements with 6 different bargaining units and with over 600 employees in this school system. This plan has yet to be negotiated with any of those bargaining units, with any of those labor associations. And that is a piece that needs to happen as well before this plan reaches conclusion. So with all of that being said, again, I think the most important sentence in this document is that this plan will continue to be a living and evolving document. And if I may, I'd like to draw the board's attention to a few key features in this document. And I would like to encourage everybody in the community who may be watching tonight to read the document in its entirety. It runs some 47 pages, but I do think that it is important for everyone to read the document. I think about 30 of those 47 pages consists of checklists that will help us as we define and as we detail the specific plans at each of our 7 school locations. That being said, there are some priorities that are built into this plan, and the first is the safety of all students and all staff. We're in the middle of an emergency. We're in the middle of a medical emergency. We are in the middle of an educational emergency. When we shifted to distance learning at the end of this previous school year, we made it clear that our first focus is on keeping our students safe and healthy from this virus. And that is the first priority of this plan. We intend to make sure that we are developing and that we are disseminating appropriate educational opportunities. School will not look like it has looked in the past. Whatever we do, whichever phase we land in, things will be different. We will be changing our instructional approaches. We will be modifying our instructional approaches, but we are committed to providing appropriate educational opportunities to all of our students, regardless of grade level and regardless of whether they're learning from home or in person with us in our schools this year. That will look different. We are aware that not a single adult in this community has ever experienced what our students have experienced over this past year or will experience as students as they return to their schools. We are placing a priority on the social and emotional well-being of our students, as well as on the academic expectations of our students as they return. We want to make sure that they are well and healthy emotionally, as well as physically, as well as pursuing their academics. And finally, we do expect to make a full school year's worth of growth, a grade level worth of growth for all of our students this year, again, regardless of grade level and regardless of where they're learning. Now that's going to look different, and I can guarantee that it will look different come December and May than it will this September. We are still learning much about what happened at the end of last school year and about the instructional strategies and approaches that we will embrace moving into this school year. We are learning through this experience with our students, alongside our students. I also want to make clear that we will be prioritizing this year on moving students forward and on using formative assessment to help us do that. I want to make clear that we do not expect to open this school year by attempting to remediate all of our students because of the experiences that they had last year, and therefore missing out on yet a second school year, compounding on the one that was impacted last year. We certainly will do measures and diagnostic assessments where and when appropriate, but as we did at the end of last year, we will be focusing on moving forward. We will be building upon positive relationships with students, and we will be building on what they have learned, what they do know, and what they can learn, not focusing on a deficit measure of what did we lose last year. Every one of these models, or more specifically, every one of these models. In every one of these models, we expect that we will have some number of adults and students coming into our schools, and I'll speak more about that a little bit specifically. The number of students who will be coming into schools compared to the number of students who will be learning at home is what is different in each of these three phases. Anytime that students are in our schools, we will be building on 4 essential safety measures. Now, there's a lot more than this. There's 37 pages of checklists. But the big rocks, the big cornerstones are that we are looking at our transportation system. And this is a different message from me to this community. Wherever possible, we are encouraging families and parents to drive your students to school, or allow your students to bike to school or walk to school if you live that close to a school. To the degree that we can reduce the density on our school buses, we will be helping everybody who rides the buses and attends the schools. So for this year, and I hope for this year only, we are encouraging parents wherever possible to drive your children to your local schools, and on the buses, therefore, taking advantage of that reduced density. We will be distributing students, spreading students out, taking advantage of social distancing, and requiring masks. Students who do wear the public school buses this year will be required to wear masks, face coverings on the bus. In grades K through 8 specifically, less so at the high school, we will be focusing on cohorting. This is going to be a practice of keeping small groups of students discrete in small groups of students. We will therefore be reducing the amount of social exchange that happens in a school. That's disappointing. That is one of those big changes that will be happening in our school district this year. It's part of prioritizing their physical health and well-being. It's simplest to recognize at the elementary level. A group of 18 students who come together in a third grade classroom will essentially stay together in that classroom all day. Students generally do that now at the elementary level. They leave their classes very few times for opportunities with lunch or recess or in specials classes, opportunities like PE and music and art. Cohorting will, in most cases, be bringing those activities into the classroom. So the students will still be with the same group of 18 students as they would be in previous years, but rather than walking the halls to travel from their classroom to the music room or the art room, those teachers will be traveling to them, bringing that experience into their classroom. We will still, as often as possibly, be providing outside opportunities for recess, for mask breaks, or for some of those special opportunities. We're currently exploring the opportunity to install large tents at every facility so that those opportunities can continue even in inclement weather. But cohorting is a compromise. It will reduce the social opportunities in order to increase the social distancing that will help us to reduce spread in our schools, in our community, or in our state. Beyond that social distancing within the facilities, to the degree possible, we will be working to keep space between individuals in our buildings, just as you do in public now, as you do if you enter a supermarket. We are looking at removing ancillary furniture from the classroom so that we can take the opportunities to spread student furniture out as much as possible. We will be reminding students that they need to keep space between each other and among each other. We will be looking at instructional practices like putting students together, sitting on the floor in a tight circle. That won't be occurring. We will certainly be looking for ways to continue to have students to collaborate and learn together in school, but we will be working in ways to keep that social distancing. In places where the classrooms or the furniture make that difficult, we're looking at supporting that distancing with plexiglass or plastic shields so that the shield can help to increase the distance or the separation between two students. I want to be very clear here. The Connecticut plan does not call out a specific distance. We are not saying that during an entire school day, your child will always be kept a full 6 feet away from any other individual in the school. We're not even saying that we will guarantee that your child will always be a full 3 feet apart from any other individual in the school. What we're saying is that we recognize that distance is a good, that distance is a value, and we will do everything we can to always maximize that distance throughout the school day. And then finally, and this is very important, and in fact, it is the most important plan in any of the phases that involve students being in our schools, and that is the wearing of face coverings. We will be requiring that all children and adults in our schools wear face coverings while they are in the building, while they are within those spaces of each other. We will be scheduling mask breaks. We will be looking for opportunities to get students outside and appropriately spaced so that they can remove those masks. But the bottom line is we will be requiring face coverings on our buses, in the schools, in the classrooms. Any individual who feels that they have a medical exception to that will be asked to provide a doctor's note. Currently, if students are to be excused from a class like PE, we ask for a doctor's note. If students are going to have access to our elevators in any of our buildings, we ask for a doctor's note. This is the most important thing that we can be doing to help make each other comfortable in our school settings, to keep each other safe in our school settings, and to get back to school. We will be requiring face coverings. The key to this plan, and I'm going to skip forward a little bit, and I'm going to touch on the instructional plan. I mentioned in the beginning that this plan is built on 3 phases. An in-person phase, which would be opening our school to all of our students for the 177 days of school that is required this year. We recognize that in the full reopening to in-person learning, that not every student or family will take advantage of that. But the point here is that we will be open. We will be inviting all students to return. We will be ready to support all students. And any student who chooses not to return, we will then support that student as an exception. But in-person learning is that full return, all students coming back and practicing all of those health and safety measures that I just mentioned. Hybrid learning will open the schools, but only to 50% of our population on a day. We will be building a rotating schedule, and students will be invited to come to school some of the days of a school week, but not all of the days of a school week. You'll be in school with half the population for 2 days a week, and you'll be continuing to learn at home with half the population for the other 3 days a week. The idea here is that it simply reduces the density in our building. All of those safety protocols will remain in place, and all of those safety protocols will in effect be more effective because the density of the building will be halved. If you can picture our high school, which generally accommodates 1,000 students a day, it would only be accommodating 500 students on any given day during the hybrid model. All students will be receiving a mix of in-person and distance learning instruction. And then the final phase would be the distance learning phase, where all of the students return to the distance learning model that we experienced from March through June of this past year. We do expect and we hope that even if we needed to return to distance learning, we may be able to keep a few of our classrooms open for some of our students with specific individualized needs, and that for some of our students, a very small percentage of our students, we would be able to continue providing some in-person instruction. This would not be for the majority of students. Our approach to supporting our students across this continuum is a plan for blended learning. And what blended learning means is that in the beginning of this school year, as we continue to plan at each of our 7 buildings, we will schedule for a school year in the way that we have traditionally and always scheduled for a school year. So a teacher at the elementary level might be assigned 18, or for purposes of conversation, 20 students into her classroom. Teams at the middle schools would be scheduled across 4 teachers with teams of 80, or for ease of conversation, 100 students. And at the high school, every student will be assigned their full schedule of courses, whether that's 4 or 5 or 7 courses that students are carrying at the high school this year. And again, for ease of conversation, you can assume that those are classes with 20 students scheduled into each class. In the in-person learning phase, we would be opening schools and inviting all of those students to return every day to school. We've polled our parent community, and we know that parents have responded that somewhere between 10 and 30% of families don't feel comfortable returning to school in that setting at this time, based on the information that they have in front of them. The way that would work out in blended learning is that a classroom teacher with 20 students could expect that 2 or 4 or 6 students might be staying at home while she is teaching in the classroom. Our teachers would be supporting those students through a rigorous live streaming opportunity, as well as continued blended learning opportunities. Those students would have the opportunity during moments of direct overt instruction to join the classroom through the Google or Zoom platform. So while the teacher was delivering a mini lesson for 20 minutes at the beginning of an English language arts block, those 2 or 4 or 6 students at home would be able to listen to that instruction and in fact participate in that student conversation. When the students moved into small group or individual application of that mini lesson, those students would then log out and would do that work at home independently, maybe in collaboration with another student who was working at home, possibly in collaboration with a student who's sitting in the classroom with the teacher through any of those distance platforms. The idea of blended learning is combining the asynchronous activities that happen periodically through the school day with the synchronous activities that happen throughout the school day with some of the asynchronous opportunities that we developed during the distance learning phase. Now, if we were to shift to a hybrid setting, essentially what would happen in that setting is that half of the students would be in class, 10 of the 20 students would be in class with that teacher on Monday and Tuesday of any given week. Again, the other 10 students who are at home could be participating in those classroom opportunities through live streaming of activities that were happening in class, or participating in distance learning opportunities as we've been doing previously. On Thursday and Friday, the second cohort would come to class. The 10 students who were home on Monday and Tuesday would be in school on Thursday and Friday. Teachers would have the opportunity of designing different opportunities, one in-person opportunity and one at-home opportunity, and delivering them alternating on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or developing one activity that students participated in from both home and in the classroom. Wednesdays would be a day that all students engaged in distance learning, and we would use that day in between the two cohorts to deep clean the buildings. Additionally, that deep cleaning would take place on Friday as well. In a distance learning setting, we have now determined that we need to close schools because the numbers in Connecticut are increasing. And in that setting, all 20 of the students would be home, receiving support from the teacher through the distance learning platforms and practices that we developed and that we will continue to develop from March through the beginning of this school year. Now, I've had a number of people ask me why we would approach a blended learning approach to this rather than try to stand up both a virtual school and an in-person school. Why not create a fully distance learning school that would support the 10 to 30% of students who are choosing to remain at home, and then support a separate and a standalone in-person school that would support the 70 to 90% of students who at this time plan on returning to school. The difficulty in that comes in staffing and in logistics. We expect those numbers to be fluid over the course of the school year. In fact, I expect our highest numbers of parents and students expecting to stay home to be early in the school year. If Connecticut continues to see positive numbers with spread like we're seeing now, and if the community becomes confident that we're doing a good job with distance learning and cohorting and providing a safe and distanced space area, then we're going to see more students wanting to come home. This blended learning approach is actually very responsive to that scenario, or to a more pessimistic scenario that might lead with us opening up and in person, needing to retreat to hybrid, and even needing to retreat further to distance learning later in the fall if we see a spike in spread in the state. If we try to stand up and staff two different school systems, one virtual and one in person, it becomes very challenging to get student numbers that provide for social distancing within the schools and are reasonable to staff members and to parents who are expecting their children to be supported at home. This is the most normal approach to schooling that we believe that we can find. This builds on the experiences that our teachers have had with differentiating to meet individual student needs, and we believe it is the most flexible and the most positive moving forward. It asks a lot of teachers. We are asking our teachers to come into a school year and to plan for eventualities that we had not asked them to plan before, that we had not anticipated in our training, in our pre-service training, or in the work that we've been doing as a school district. But we believe that it is the most appropriate approach to this plan. Now, again, this is the district level plan. It is yet to be scheduled or staffed at the building level, and we have yet to sit down officially with any of our bargaining units, with the Teachers Association, to discuss or negotiate the impact of that expectation moving forward. But we fully expect to do that negotiation and to build those schedules moving forward. I was also asked across this weekend about who decides whether the numbers in Connecticut, the viral transmission, is identified as low or moderate or high. That's a decision that would be made at the state level. Until 4 o'clock today, we anticipated that directives for moving into either the distance learning, the hybrid, or the fully open model would also be decisions that were made at the state level. We will look more carefully to find out how we locally should respond to information from the state in making our decisions about what model we are in and at what levels of our system that model will land. The real meat of this plan, however, is broken down into 7 areas. The 50 pages of guidance that the state provided to us was broken into 7 key areas: instruction, social and emotional wellness, technology, pandemic response, health, facilities, and transportation. The state provided us with both requirements and suggested guidance in each of these areas. Dr. Crystal and Mr. Bowden stood up 2 subcommittees that looked at these areas. Dr. Crystal worked very closely with Mr. Scanziano, as well as principals and teachers in the district. Mr. Bowden worked very closely with Mr. Gurnham, as well as principals, assistant principals, teachers in the district, looking at their areas. I'd like to offer them each just a few minutes to speak to the different areas that they addressed. I want to direct the board and the community's attention to the pages that follow. They begin to break out into checklists under each of those 7 areas. We will use those checklists at all 7 of our buildings to make sure that we are ready to open in each of those 7 buildings. But again, I wanted to give an opportunity to both Dr. Crystal and then Mr. Bowden, and then open this up for an opportunity to have conversation with the board. Dr. Crystal, would you like to touch on the teaching and learning side of the equation first?
Sure. I think that you spoke very eloquently describing the phases and the flexible move between in-person to hybrid to distance. There are just a few things that I would really like to underscore. The fluidity of this blended learning model, which really relies quite a bit on flexibility, but also consistency. So I don't want people to come away with the idea that this is going to look different in every single phase. We're really talking about the same high quality, rigorous instruction that we have in person that is adjusted specifically to meet whatever the virus dictates in terms of how many students are actually in front of us. So the adjustments that we're making through the use of technology really revolve around how the instruction is being delivered. And it really is a form of differentiation, because if I have 90% of my students in front of me and a few students at home, I'm thinking about how can I adjust my instruction somewhat for the students that are at home. Now, the technology piece that's noted there, we've learned a lot from the distance learning that we've done over the last quarter of the year. And a lot of what we learned and a lot of what we're learning over the summer is really informing that structure of moving back and forth among the phases. So we've had an opportunity to try out a lot of different apps and platforms that we were not using before we went into the distance learning phase. And we're seeing what works and what doesn't work. And this summer, we actually adjusted our instruction to be a lot more inquiry-based and instruction that requires a lot more independence on the part of the learner. And we're learning from the summer experiences as well about the balance of what we can do in terms of direct instruction versus what students can be able to do more independently and on their own. And that's really informing the way we design the instruction going forward. One of the things I want to mention too is that we're looking at the priority standards for all the content areas coming up for the course of this year. And we're going to be designing our instruction to make sure that we're focusing on depth as opposed to just topic coverage, and looking at those priority standards, and then looking at the standards that were addressed or were to be addressed in the last quarter of last year, and making sure that we infuse and support the learning of those standards into the instruction that we do going forward. And Dr. Freeman mentioned that we're not looking at any large scale remediation because the research is showing that that just creates larger gaps and that students fall farther and farther behind. So we're really looking at ways to keep students in grade level content and keep them in the curriculum that they would normally be receiving this year, but to scaffold and support the learning as it is needed during the curriculum. So for example, if students are learning, I'll give you a math example, if they're learning about ratios, they need to learn a certain prerequisite knowledge about fractions. But rather than teach everything about fractions that we would have taught them the year before, we're going to teach them what they need to know about ratios at that particular point so that the learning is in context and it makes sense to them, and it's a deeper form of learning. The technology piece, Dr. Freeman mentioned the use of cameras. And again, that goes to what I said before about the balance of direct instruction versus independent work. And I think that's going to be the real work going forward for teachers, especially in those first 7 days and the first month of school, is learning about using that technology to support that balance of instruction. And the first, if we do open completely fully, that first 4 to 6 weeks of school is going to be working a lot with students with technology, because if we have to go back into a distance learning environment, we're going to be able to do that with a lot more consistency and with a lot more parameters around the way that might look. The other thing I just want to mention is that social emotional piece, and that really is the umbrella over everything that we are doing going forward into this school year. We want the students to feel welcome. We want them to feel safe. We want them to be engaged in what they're doing in school. So there will be a social emotional focus for everything that we do going forward. The very first things that we do in school going back are really going to address that social emotional piece. We want highly engaging and high success activities for students to be involved in, and we want them to feel comfortable with their teachers. We want them to get used to the new procedures, moving in and out of buildings, teachers coming into their rooms wearing masks, dividers up, all of those things. We don't want them to be afraid. We want them to feel welcome and comfortable in that environment going forward. And I think that's pretty much it, Dr. Freeman, unless you want to add something to that.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Crystal. I want to give Mr. Bowden the same opportunity and then open it up to the board members.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. I too want to say that you did a great job introducing many of the areas that my committees had worked on. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all of the people that participated in the planning behind this document on my side as well, and the work they've put into it, not only to make the document, but now to work on the finer details that go behind implementing this plan. If I may, I'd like to just point out a few things working from the bottom to the top. In the area of transportation, Mr. Dorman's been working very, very closely with specialty in regard to the practices and procedures that will be implemented regarding busing. And I want to thank them for that. They've been responsive to everything that we've asked of them to do. And more information will be coming out via either Lori Hahn's office or on the website related to frequently asked questions that parents may have that we can answer directly either from Mr. Dorman's office or also online. I would like to point out, you mentioned, Dr. Freeman, cohorting not only in the classrooms, but we're making every effort to cohort on buses as well. And that's going to have implications related to what we've done in past years, such as dropping off at the green, joint custody agreements, specialty drops along the way for various activities. We cannot do that anymore under these conditions. We want to maintain the cohorting on the bus. So that will include ceasing, as it says in a document, a student that may want to be dropped off at a friend's house. In the past, they would have a bus pass. That will not be allowed now. To Dr. Freeman's point, that's one of the reasons why picking up and dropping off your child at the school will certainly help alleviate and address some of those concerns. I also want to point out on the area of transportation that we're also working with building principals and administrators on specific procedures related to drop-offs and pickups in the morning and the PM. Some of the traffic patterns you may have been used to in the past may be changing in the future, so we'll keep you apprised of of those changes as they emerge. In the area of facilities, we have been looking at the safety and sanitation protocols in place throughout the district. Mr. Gurnham and I have met with all of the building principals to see a mock-up of some of the classrooms and making sure that all unnecessary furniture has been removed and that we're maximizing the use of space. Mr. Gurman is working on the sanitation protocols for each building and what that means in terms of not only having the building clean and safe for our staff and our students, but also implementing whatever supports we can put in place that support the instructional side. So I think Dr. Crystal spoke of dividers. Wherever possible, we're putting up plexiglass or like dividers to help students have a safe environment by which they can sit and work and keep the teachers safe as well. And a number of other procedures, as you see in the document, related to airflow and ventilation and all the items that are related to that. One area, the next area, which is not under a bullet, is dining services. Mrs. Biagietti has been working very hard to come up with a plan for each of the three opening modules. We know that we had the distance learning piece in the spring, but we're working on procedures related to bringing meals to the classrooms and what that may look like. So that is yet to be set right now, but we're in those discussions with her. She's had a number of conversations with local, with statewide food directors in terms of what the state expects and what those protocols will be. Another area that is not explicit on this document that we are currently working on is a staffing plan to help support instruction and help support some of the operational pieces that we have throughout the district, not only in every bargaining unit, providing some additional supports, but also the unaffiliated positions, such as possibly adding additional FTEs around recess aides, lunch aides, et cetera, building substitutes and other areas to help support not only the instructional piece of the school day, but also the all the other areas that occur within a school building during the day. Pam Nelliber, our Director of Nursing, has been working diligently on the health and wellness piece of this document. She's working on day-to-day protocols related to what we do when a student becomes sick, what the basic guidelines will be throughout the day and protocols in regards to students entering and leaving the building. And you can see that explicitly put out in the guidelines in the document. We've had a number of conversations, or at least several conversations so far with our medical consultant within the district. Dr. Freeman and I have spoken not only with our medical consultant, our Director of Nursing, but also with our area local health officials to discuss various scenarios which relate to the last item, which is the pandemic response planning, which we are currently working on at this time. Dr. Freeman, would you like to add anything?
No, thank you, Mr. Bowden. I think that is essentially the overview of the document that we wanted to share with all of you and with the community. Again, from page 18 on, the document turns into this series of color-coded checklists and a reminder for the community. These are checklists that we will be using as a leadership team as we walk through scheduling and designing for the opening at each of our 7 buildings. Again, I want to apologize to the community for the lateness with that this document is appearing, and for the fact that it remains unfinished. It's simply a function of the reality in which we find ourselves. This will continue to be a developing and evolving living document as we now begin working on the specific logistics that fall under this document at each of those 7 locations, and continue to follow changes from the state level, both around the medical realities and the flexibilities or changing expectations that the governor and the State Department may have for local school districts. And with that, Dr. Balistraci, we're happy to open up for comments and questions and conversation with the board.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Freeman, Dr. Crystal, and Mr. Bowden. This was very helpful. I am now going to open up to board questions.
We did it in less than an hour. I'd like to point that out.
You're not going to be that lucky tomorrow.
Are there board members that have questions? Go ahead, Moira.
Sure. Well, thank you all of you for your concise but really informative summaries of the return to school reopening plan. I've gotten some questions from the community regarding if we're in a hybrid, and I already kind of know this answer, but do you anticipate the division of the students by last names so that siblings can be kept together? Will there be a survey as to determine how that's actually going to work for working families? I know there's a lot of concern, and I think everyone understands this is fluid and changing, but if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, but that's a really important detail and question. The quick answer is that yes, we will ensure that siblings in different grade levels, different classes, or even different schools are on the same hybrid schedule. So that if you've got 3 children at 3 different grade levels in this school system, they will all be in school on Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. So the bottom line is that we'll be encouraging principals to begin scheduling those cohorts within classrooms using the alphabet as a starting point, but not locking in rigidly to say that everybody who comes before M has to be on Monday and Tuesday and everybody who comes after M has to be on Thursday and Friday. The reality is in 2 different classrooms, that break point's going to fall. One classroom might only have 3 students with names who come in the first. So we will be starting with the alphabet as a beginning piece, but just as principals thoughtfully make class assignments and team assignments and schedules at the high school, we will be looking carefully. We will be taking feedback from families. We will first be ensuring that we keep siblings on a like calendar. It would not be helpful to have your students on 2 different schedules. We understand that. And secondly, wherever possible, also meeting other family needs wherever possible. But for instance, if there's somebody in this community who already knows that they work a Thursday and Friday shift rotation, we will work with that person even if your last name falls on the wrong end of the alphabet. We will look to be as accommodating as possible, recognizing that this is just one more layer of complexity, and we will be as accommodating as we can possibly be as wherever we can be. And lots of you know that not everybody gets the class assignment that they keep their fingers crossing for and hoping for as you go into 4th grade or 8th grade or the high school. Not everybody gets a class with their best friend or with the teacher that they were hoping for, but we recognize that there are important elements in this scheduling, and we'll do everything to meet those conditions.
Thank you.
Dr. Freeman, of my many questions, I think the most burning one that I have right now is really the metrics that we're going to be using to define these 3 different protocols. You know, how do you, you know, where would we be right now, for instance, on today's date? Would we be distance? Would we be, would we be hybrid in school? And then I'm wondering, of those 3, how do we decide what triggers, changing the makeup of the school?
It's also a really good question, and it's one that we don't have complete local control over. So currently, the state still believes that our viral transmission numbers, which I think as of today are still the best in the country, justify a full reopening of school with health and safety mitigating factors in place, the things that we covered. I believe that the flexibility that the governor and the commissioner spoke about today is more in response to the reality that some high schools in the state, particularly some of our largest high schools, are running into in providing social distancing, in providing even an attempt at the cohorting that we talked about. moving forward locally, I don't think that we would be, the state hasn't published any numbers that I've seen that would tie to low, moderate, or severe transmission. We would be following the guidance and the recommendations of both state and local health officials. So if today we recognize that spread in the entire state and spread in the Guilford area is low, if we saw a local spike, then in collaboration with the local health authorities, we could proactively contact the state and say, did you know there's a cluster in Guilford? There's a spike in Guilford. We are telling you that we think we need to retreat to either hybrid or distance learning, and we would have to approach the state for permission to do that. Or more likely, the state would end up making an announcement, probably by county, if not statewide, saying that the numbers have reached a level that we are now requiring schools to retreat in whole to either the hybrid or the distance structure. The bottom line is this: state statute requires that a school district, that a community offer 188 full days of school to every school-age child in the community. Every year we know that there are families that don't take advantage of that. Some families homeschool, some families go to private school, some students run into situations where the district does provide homeschooling opportunities for them on a limited basis, usually around a health issue. Right now, the state has not changed that statute. The state hasn't changed that mandate. So anytime that we are going to move off of or retreat from the full opening of 177 days, we would need state either direction or permission. And I wish we had hard numbers. I wish I could tell you that 0 to 5% is low and 5 to 20, but I have not seen those numbers published anywhere on a state level. My understanding is that we will receive direction or guidance from the state and local health authorities. Currently today, the spread is being described or defined as low. That's vague, but is it helpful?
You know, I think it's going to be the number one question that people are going to, really persist to want an answer from, because that's where things are just going to move the most. That's, the unpredictability is, where are we today versus where are we going to be next week versus next month, and making a decision based on that.
Not to completely blame the state for this, and I'm certainly no epidemiologist, but I think the fact is that I think we want to be careful about setting hard numbers or hurdles, because I also think part of it has to do with the onset of growth. So, right, I think slow growth towards a hurdle would be different than really fast growth that only got you halfway to the hurdle. You might not want to wait even the additional few days to hit
Sure.
to hit a cut number if you're watching really fast growth. And so again, I'm speaking outside my realm of expertise, but I think that the state is trying to maintain some degree of fluidity in that determination so that they can be having thoughtful conversations. Cut numbers are helpful, but once a cut number is published, it also becomes dangerous, because now, even if you decide to make a decision before you hit that number, you've miscommunicated to a part of your community, because you've told them you weren't going to close schools until you hit that number. So I do think that there's a lot of thought going into it. I know that question is being asked at a lot of different levels. It's being asked of us here in Guilford, and it's certainly being asked in Hartford. It's just that my long and winded around the bush is the best answer that I can give to that question here today.
I think the other piece, John, with that Paul alluded to is, the ongoing, I would expect almost daily conversation with the local health officials, because as we're monitoring student and staff and employee health and wellness, they're monitoring people that are not part of the school system, the greater community itself. So to Dr. Freeman's point about a hard number, are you talking about a hard number of school population? Or are you talking about, the community, and or the region? And I just think it's going to be a communication between, those entities to be able to say, here's where we are both in the locality of school and in Guilford in general.
Can we clarify one thing, Dr. Freeman? In this plan, is it contemplated that, for example, we might have one method for the high school and a different method for the middle schools and the elementary schools?
That was not part of our thinking prior to 4 o'clock this afternoon, but that is something that we appear to either have the opportunity or the responsibility to be considering more closely now. It's come up. We were talking about something like that 6 or 7 weeks ago at a state level. I've had some parents contact me. I know that Dr. Crystal has had some conversations with parents, and there's some suggestion that high school students might be more capable of maintaining their forward progress in a distance learning model. They're certainly more independent. And there's been some suggestion that the high school schedule lends itself more easily to distance learning, but is really challenging to try to follow a cohort modeling. Again, the governor and the commissioner spoke to more flexibility around these decisions, but I came away a little unclear, and I'm waiting to see the written follow-up to know exactly what that means. But the quick answer is that yes, moving forward, we may have different levels in different positions on this continuum. We could be talking about an opening now that has the high school in a full distance model, Adams in a hybrid model, and the elementaries at full in-person. Now, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't go away saying that's what we're going to be opening in September. I'm saying that my understanding from the press conference today is that that is now a possibility, and we did not, again, up until 4 o'clock today, we were receiving guidance from the state that to meet the statutory requirement, we needed to offer full in-person learning at every level, and that now no longer seems to be the case.
The ideal will be if the state ultimately understands, and I think they're moving in that direction, that giving each district as much local control and decision-making is perhaps the best way to go. We're different from Hartford and New Haven, for example. What I like about this plan, for which there's no need for any apology because we're only responding to people who are dictating to you what's got to be done. But in response, what you've done is you've created a plan that is as a continuum from full in school to online. And this plan allows for not only 3 ways of operating, but multiple ways. And it's detailed enough that we have standards against which we can make decisions in terms of modality. That's number one. I'm hopeful that the state appreciates the wisdom of the plan and therefore gives you the autonomy to do that without having to ask permission, so that the questions that are being asked here can be made immediately. So I like the fluidity. I like the detailed. We're by nature, the COVID situation is ambiguous. We have imperfect information, but I think the planning to date is about as thoughtful and as detailed and as anticipatory, given what we know. And we know we're going to know much more about the numbers and about the nation and so on. But I like the notion that we can actually move fairly quickly along that continuum as a state allows that. And in that sense, I think the plan is a really first good cut roadmap for our situation.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And I do want to give credit. The state gave us a good framework from which to work. And there's a number of other districts that are looking at the continuum and the blended learning approach in the way that we are. That is not a unique or a copyrighted idea. I know that as of today, I'm at least aware of districts like New Canaan and Avon and Farmington and Simsbury, West Hartford, I believe, Old Saybrook, that are thinking similarly and that are approaching the idea of being fluid and flexible along a continuum like this as being the right approach, the right way to go. We feel good about that. I do think that there needs to be some consistency. I think that there needs to be latitude for locals to make decisions. But then I also worry. I worry that that when districts have the local ability to be making some of those decisions, that communities inherently start comparing one to the other, and it becomes difficult. And we saw this around graduation, to be candid. It becomes difficult when we make a local decision here in Guilford, and then people look to the west and look to the east, and but why didn't we do it the same way that the community 2 doors down to the west did it? Or why didn't we do it the way somebody just north of us did it? And that becomes difficult, and that becomes challenging to maintain. So I know that we simply need to make the best decisions that we can make. We can be responsible for our own decisions. We're ready and prepared to do that. There is sometimes some ease in implementation when everybody's doing the same thing. And so I understand that may not be the best approach, but it often helps with public reaction at times. I do want to say again, here's a good place to pause and point this out. We do have another conversation scheduled tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. on Zoom, where we will be fielding questions from the parent community as well. So I'm hoping that people who are listening at home now and unable to get your questions heard tonight can join us tomorrow night so that you can ask those parent questions as well.
But as I said last week, we have 2 competing goods for which we can't satisfy 2 conditions easily. One is health and safety, and the other is educational quality. And at least as I get emails and calls from the public, people are obviously concerned almost first and foremost with health and safety. And from where I'm sitting, it seems to me, in terms of decision-making criteria, it's prudent to err always on the side of health and safety. We can always make up in the long run more education, so that in fact, if we err at all, I assume we're going to always err on doing things that on the safe side, even if some people second guess us and say, well, it's not as educational as it could have been, or it's not as academic. But at this point in time, health and safety is paramount.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I just wanted to, that brings up a point that I was going to ask earlier regarding safety. I know, Dr. Friedman, you mentioned about getting waivers throughout the year for any one of these particular plans regarding safety drills that commence at all the schools. What is the status of that update? If you talk to the town chiefs and emergency service personnel?
Yeah, we met locally with the fire chief and the police chief here. We shared with them some of the expectations and recommendations that were coming in this plan. You know, some of the things that are recommended in the COVID plan are in fact contradictory to mandates that exist in current things like fire code. And so locally, I understand that our local chiefs have no ability to grant waivers for that. We're still being held to fire code. We still have student safety protocols that are in place in our buildings to protect from outside dangers that could come into our schools. All of those conditions are still in place. I do believe that there is some conversation. I think there has been some request at the state level to look at things like the current door protocols that exist in fire code, the requirements for fire drills and lockdown drills. You know, to Dr. Crystal's point, one of the things that we're concerned about is bringing our students back in these first weeks of school and making sure that we're being responsive to their social and emotional condition, that we're making them feel safe and comfortable and happy coming back into their school, even though they're traveling less, they're seeing more custodians, and people are wearing masks in the building. In September, we're required to conduct 2 fire drills and 2 lockdown intruder drills. To me, those are both going to be disruptive to that calm environment that we're hoping to create in this unique year. And they run counter to some of the things around social distancing and cohorting. Now, if we're required to do it, we'll figure out a way to do it best and talk to our students about it and limit those stress levels. But in what is going to be a unique year, we're still following that conversation. No update from last week, Joe. There haven't been any permissions or waivers or exemptions from any of those current codes at this time.
Can we talk a little bit about the how we're approaching education for some of our special ed students? Because I've gotten several questions from constituents on that. And the questions would go around. I mean, as I'm sure you've heard, a lot of the parents of these kinds of students were less than satisfied with the distance learning because it is not as effective for some of those students as it is for others. And so the question would be, is there a way we could make, for example, if we were in a hybrid mode or a distance learning mode, would it be possible for some of the special ed students to still come into the classrooms and still meet with their paras and that sort of thing? And secondly, what would the status be for the students who are outplaced? I mean, we pulled back all the outplaced students when we closed the schools, but going forward, are the schools that we're outplacing students with, are they willing to accept the students back?
So the quick answer is to item number 1, yes, and to item number 2, we're working on it. So your first question was about how are we scheduling for students who are identified with special educational needs? The first answer is that for most of those students, we're scheduling in the same way that we are now. They will continue to be assigned to classroom teachers as well as to a special educational teacher who will support their needs. As we moved into the distance learning program, we scrambled to find ways to support students with special needs. They did have the benefit of being supported both by their classroom teacher as well as their special education teacher or case manager, and it didn't happen immediately, but in the first few weeks we were able to begin re-entering paraprofessionals even into the distance learning model. Both of your hypotheticals are ideas we're already working on. So in a hybrid model, there will be some subset of students with special needs, not all of them, but some students who receive very individualized, specialized instruction may be coming in both on Monday and Tuesday and on Thursday and Friday because they receive a very specialized form of instruction that may be very physical in nature and only translates in person. It translates imperfectly or more imperfectly through a technological virtual distance platform. My real hope is even if we were to move into a full distance learning model, that we would be able to keep some small number of classrooms open at each building so that, again, those students with very specialized, very individualized instruction were able to continue to come into the setting. That was not allowed to us during the initial lockdown, and quite honestly, it will depend, I think, on whether or not we go into a full quarantine and lockdown, or whether the state is almost more preemptively suggesting that schools return to a distance learning model, but leave us the latitude. So again, where I spoke to that continuum, I think that even in a full reopening, we will probably only bring 90% of our students back for in-person learning. I think that if we go to the hybrid model, by definition, it will be 50-50 on any given day. And even in the full distance learning model, I'm hopeful that we may have 95 or 96% of our students placed at home, but some small percentage of 3 or 4% of our students with very specialized, individualized instruction are able to continue to come to school and receive that instruction in person. The outplacements, the students that we have who are Guilford Public Schools students who we place in private tuitioned placements, that's a very small number of students. We're talking about 30 students district-wide. Those all need to be managed individually. Most of those institutions are reopening. They are opening with contingency plans, some of them very similar to what we're discussing tonight, and our students will be able to continue either day or residential instruction in those settings, depending on what kind of supports they were receiving in the past. Some of those schools have gone out of business. Some of the placements where we had students placed are not reopening after the COVID closures of last year, and we are through the PPT process identifying alternate appropriate placements for those students. And some are opening but with changed conditions. So those are all individualized plans, and they're all being addressed independently with the families and with the PPTs through Mr. Scanziano's office.
That's helpful. Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you for asking it. I don't know if I mentioned, so I might be repeating myself, but I did want to mention that Mr. Scanziano and I hosted, I know that we've talked about a number of the focus groups that Dr. Crystal and I have hosted. Dr. Crystal and Mr. Scanziano and I met specifically with a group of special education parents and had a conversation with just parents of students with special needs about their experiences through March and fall and what they're looking for and what they're worried about or hopeful about as we move into this reopening in September. I did want to just mention that we had that conversation with that subset of parents as well. Not every special education parent, but a representative group.
Dr. Freeman, Kristen Peck, who is obviously one of our Board of Ed members, is on the line via phone, but is having trouble unmuting herself. So I'm gonna, she asked me to say the following and ask the following. First, she would like to commend the planning effort. She is curious to hear what happens if someone is positive for COVID-19. Does the school close or just the cohort?
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit, Paul, because to that extent, I'd also, staff, students, and also bus drivers was my question. What's the approach for all three of those if we have positive cases?
In all three of those, it would be a similar approach. In all three of those, it would be coordinated locally with our local health officials. And in all of those cases, any of the above are possible. So let's say that we identify a bus driver or a student riding a specific bus that is now positive with COVID. We would need to talk to the local health authorities. We would need to get a sense of the severity of the exposure, and we might simply restrict 1 or 2 classroom cohorts. If there's only students on that bus who go to 2 or 3 classrooms and only those students were exposed, we might, in 3 classrooms with 3 teachers and 62 students, shift and have just those students remain at home for a quarantine or testing period because we don't feel that the rest of the building was exposed. We might identify that we feel the exposure was significant to the whole building, and therefore 1 of 7 schools is closed, not closed, but transitions to the distance learning plan for those 2 weeks for the quarantine or testing period. To one of the points that Mr. Bowden made earlier, if we feel that we are approaching a level community-wide that begins to look like community spread in or near Guilford, it might be that the whole district shifts to a distance learning phase. And then that could scaffold up to a region, to a county, or to the entire state. So there is a page in the plan that sort of speaks to that, but at every one of those stages, we would be guided by communication with local health authorities. The fact is, we have already gone through some of this during the last few months of school and over the summer, not with positive cases that have been identified in our school community, but with a worker or a student or a parent who contacted us to say, we were with our brother-in-law this weekend and now he's called to say that he's got symptoms and he's being tested. And in each case, the local health authorities have protocols for how close is too close, how close is a severe, how close is an exposure. But if we identified a student in a classroom or a teacher in the hallway, one of the benefits of cohorting is the isolation, but the other benefit of the cohorting is the contact tracing that it affords. So if we identified that one music teacher was now identified, we'd be able to identify through the cohorts what students that teacher was in contact with. The health authorities would identify the time frame of concern, and then we'd be able to make those decisions. Is it one class or cohort? Is it one school? Is it the whole district? And we would respond in that way. Again, I know that there's fluidity within that, but that's the answer as it's been explained at this time.
Dr. Freeman, so as a school system, we have to carefully balance informing those people who are impacted. So you may be a parent whose child is in a classroom that is now being sent home for 2 weeks. But how are you able to kind of speak to the balance of communication there? I imagine there are parents who, might hear then that their friend's kid is now home for 2 weeks because that classroom or 3 classrooms got sent, but they may have a child in another part of the school building. I know that we as a system have to be very careful about balancing information we can share and we can't. And I'm just wondering if you can at the moment share as much as we know about what that would look like.
Yes.
Where we can be transparent and where we have to be by state regulation and requirements more careful.
Right. We would not be able to release individual or individually, right? We wouldn't be able to release individual names or individually identifiable information. That is simply about protected medical information protected under the HIPAA laws. And that would apply to anybody, adult or child, in any of those situations. I would believe, however, that if we were keeping an entire class of students home in any school setting, that would need to be made known to the other students, the other families in that school. And because of the uniqueness of this situation, I'm therefore going to say we'd have to make that known to the community. So I would think that the announcement would be something like, a class of students in this specific location are being taught at home for the next 2 weeks while testing and the quarantine period runs out. We are confident in this decision that nobody outside that cohort has been exposed or is at danger. If you have not received notification that your child, right, then it would be that kind of communication. I also believe that we're going to learn from experiences, either our own experience or vicariously, when schools do reopen this year. If the numbers don't continue just going in a positive direction, other school districts will have this experience, and I'm convinced that we will learn from examples as people figure out the best way to thread that needle, because it is a difficult balancing act between sharing with the full community all the information that they need to hear to be confident with our decisions and not violating anybody's individual rights to confidentiality. I know that CAPS has been working with a communications organization, and I would be surprised if we weren't getting template communications as we get closer to the opening of school to help us manage that and balance those two competing concerns.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Other questions that the board has? Go ahead, Moira.
Just real quickly, just to dovetail onto that, Paul. So with buses, if we have a child, if there's a classroom that's determined that there was a possible exposure in that classroom or that cohort is sent home for 2 weeks, does it then touch onto all of those buses? If those children are determined to be sent home, but then does it reach to that second cohort for every student in that classroom? I mean, I know this is all hypothetical.
Yeah, no, but these are really, these are really thoughtful questions. So again, students in most settings will be exposed to 2 cohorts every day. One cohort of students with whom they ride the bus, and one cohort of students with whom they spend their day in school. Parents in Guilford can facilitate reducing that exposure if they can voluntarily agree to drive their students to school in this coming school year. So to your question, if the child in the classroom, right, one of our first questions will be, if this child comes down with a positive test, one of our first questions will be, how do you get to school? If that child has been driven to school by his or her parents, then that stream of investigation stops right there. We don't have to talk to everybody who's been riding that bus, because that child has never stepped foot on that bus. If it is a child who rides the bus, again, we'd be following guidance from the local health officials, but I would imagine we would now need to know, where did you sit on the bus? Who was the closest person to you? How crowded was the bus? Were we able to maintain significant spacing, or was it a more full bus? And then we will have to decide, does the one classroom cohort where the child sat become 3 or 4 because there are 3 or 4 students from different, from 3 or 4 different cohorts who ride that bus? So that's in one of the ways that would make the difference, I think, between possibly needing to move an entire school to a distance setting and only moving that one classroom to a distance setting. In part, it'll be the answers. Now, the local health authorities, when they do contact tracing, will also be looking outside of schools, right? We know that students are engaged in activities that occur outside of schools as well, and those may not be bound by the cohorts that we established during the school day. So we could very easily move from a school exposure to a community exposure if you're dealing with a child who's been engaged in outside activities that occur just, beyond the school day as well.
Right.
But again, the answer is it will depend. It's going to depend on all those conditions. But that's why, and again, I never imagined in my career, I have spent my career encouraging parents to have their students ride the bus for all of the logistical and structural, but this year and I hope this is the only year in my career, any parent who can drive their child to school will be helping to provide that social distance, to provide that cohorting, and make it all the much more effective. It'll also be contributing to more traffic in front of all of our schools.
Could you speak to that? Could you speak to that? Because that's another question I keep getting is, and this is again, because now we have the plan, it has to be disseminated to all the buildings and they have to come out and come up with their own plan for this. I recognize it's probably not figured out in totality yet, but can you speak in general terms if there's any sense of how that will work? Because
yes,
I'm thinking of a family that has, mine included, 3 different buildings to drop off at in a 45-minute window. Are you going to stagger cohort? Like, how are you going to, I'm just curious what some theories are that they're out there with among the leadership as to how that might look.
We looked into staggering, and staggering doesn't work because students are on buses from all different grade levels. And so the staggered start would end up, we know that transportation is going to be infringing on instructional time this year because of the cohorting around arrival and dismissal procedures. To stagger the arrivals would have made it all the more challenging and all the more impactful. What we will be doing, and again, this is one of the reasons that it's 7 different plans, and people would think, well, the elementary plan is the same at all the locations. It's not, and transportation is one of the reasons. We are looking to try to separate more fully the parent drop off from the bus arrival in the mornings. And the high school is possibly the best example of that. At the high school currently, we've got the buses and the parent drop off coming into essentially the same driveway, coming into the same front parking lot and entering through the front door. So we're currently exploring an opportunity, and the bus loop is right in front of the north entrance at the high school. We're looking at the possibility of pulling the parental drop off to either the west entrance or the south entrance. The idea behind this would be, one, that again, think of a full opening. If we've got 1,000 students arriving to school every day, they all come through that main front door. I don't think that the break is going to be exactly 50-50, but if it was, you'd have half the students on buses coming in the front door and half the students in parental drop-off coming in the south door, and you immediately reduce density. You immediately create more space and create more of an opportunity. We're also looking at possibilities of then having that parent drop-off exit through a different drive at the high school, maybe out through the drive placed near the tennis courts, rather than out through the drive that is so close to the bus loop itself. So we're working to, one, and first and foremost, lessen the density among the students as they arrive because of virus transmission concerns. Secondly, we will do whatever we can to lessen traffic. But the reality is, and this is one of the reasons that I've spent 20 years encouraging students to ride the school buses, I know that the request I'm making of the community will only exacerbate the traffic that we experience at all of our schools for 10 or 20 minutes around drop-off and for 15 or 30 minutes around dismissal time. We're doing that intentionally because we believe that the reduction in density and the health benefits from that condition is more valuable than the traffic headaches that we create. But I have to say that if you're planning on doing 3 consecutive drop-offs, it's going to be a long morning in the car every morning. It's just going to be waiting. And a parent who thinks that you can, If it normally takes you 15 minutes to get from your house to the high school, that's not what your drop-off time is going to be. Your drop-off time is probably going to be 40 minutes. And people just need to sort of build that in and bring a book on tape, because it will be slow and probably frustrating, and we understand that, but it's one of the concessions we're making to try to make sure that we're keeping our students as safe and healthy as we can. We have met with the local police department. We have met with Chief Hyatt. He's aware of the concerns. We know that they will work with us as well as they can, but the Guilford Police Department will not be able to be focusing on our 7 entrances every morning to the exclusion of the rest of the community. So we know that they will help get us started, but we'll need to ask for patience and grace from the community as we address those traffic concerns. I know they'll get better as the year unfolds, but if we've got 40 to 50% of our students being dropped off, we're creating car density for the benefit of lessening actual student physical density at our entrances and exits in the mornings and afternoons.
Thank you.
At Adams, there's an actual construction project that is taking place to try to help alleviate that. We are doing a parking lot expansion to try to better separate the parental drop-off from the bus arrivals at Adams. Right now, that all functions pretty much through the very same parking lot. We're doing the best we can to separate there, but it's also one of our busiest streets. And so we know that Adams will be a challenge, although we're working really hard to have that paving project done. And that will be it will be some mitigation of those concerns, having the new parking lot done. It's surprising to think that parking lot paving is part of the pandemic response plan, but it is. It's actually part of what's gone into the planning.
Paul, I was wondering if we could switch the focus to the staff for a minute. We've talked a lot about families being able to opt out, of certain criteria of certain, distance learning versus hybrid versus in person. Where are we with staff right now in terms of, buy into these models and, just overall concerns with the staff?
So really early on, but I really appreciate the question. We're here for our students, and our first concern is our students, but we're also tremendously concerned for our staff. And we want to make sure that we are collaborating with our staff, respecting our staff, and valuing our staff as we go through these conversations. We did a quick poll of just the teaching staff, simply because they're our largest employee group, and because we design around them almost to the same degree that we design around our students. We asked our teaching staff if they had any qualifying condition that they thought would keep them from being able to return to work in a full opening. And those qualifying conditions could have been a number of things. They could have been medical, they could have been childcare, they could have been extended family care, they could have been about transportation. We had almost 40% of our staff, right around 40% of our staff, indicate that they think they might have one of those qualifying conditions that would make returning challenging for them. I think that continued conversations about the health mitigation factors that we intend on practicing goes a long way to respecting and valuing the staff. I spent some time talking about the requirement that students wear masks in school. That is a way that every student and every parent in this community can communicate their respect and concern for the teachers who come into these buildings every day. If every child who comes into the school every day works really hard to keep their mask on properly, the teachers are going to appreciate that. That's going to make a safer environment for the teaching staff. Providing expansion areas like tented spaces, providing other dividers like plexiglass desk shields or shields at the entrance areas. We are asking the community to reduce visitation to the building. We're going to be saying that we are essentially closing the buildings to volunteers and visitors. We've got an incredibly vibrant mentor program that happens in this community that we're really proud of. But we're going to ask that shift to a virtual environment, that the mentoring take place through a Zoom meeting rather than bringing 65 or 70 mentors in and out of our buildings on a regular basis. We really want to limit the number of people coming in and out of the building. We want to focus on cleanliness. We want everyone to wear masks. We want to practice social distancing. The idea of moving to the hybrid model would be a way of reducing density district-wide or school-wide that would create much more space and make all of those mitigation factors all the more effective. And again, I mentioned a couple times, we needed to design the plan first. Now that the plan is designed, in addition to hosting a community meeting tomorrow night where we will be listening to parents and asking about parent concerns, we will be sitting down with bargaining units with 6 different bargaining units that represent almost every employee in the school district. And we've had 2 of those meetings already since the plan was released to the state and released publicly just last night, to say to them, the plan is out. Here's the overview of the plan, just a broad overview similar to what I provided to all of you earlier this evening, and then saying to them, now take this plan and go read it. And if you see areas that it impacts the working conditions, if you've got good ideas, we want to hear back from you as well. You know, all of the adults and employees who walk into our building are our second greatest priority. They're only second to the kids. We need to make sure that we're providing an environment that is respectful and safe of all of them. And when we mention social emotional wellness, right? Kids can't learn if they're not coming into the building feeling comfortable, safe, and happy. And our teachers aren't going to be at their best if they don't return to school feeling comfortable, safe, and happy. I don't expect that to happen on day 1. But I intend to do everything we can possibly do so that they feel and trust that we've given them a work environment that is safe, where they can stop worrying about their own health and focus on the learning of their students. And that makes teachers happy. If we can get there, then they'll feel happy and they'll feel effective and they'll know that they're doing good for their students. But you know, we have staff members who have kids at home. We have staff members who care for parents at home. We have legitimate safety concerns that need to be heard, listened to, and responded to before we can say that this plan is done, it's fully baked, and that we are not. This plan is written in pencil and it's on cheap paper for a reason, because we know it needs to change and we need to listen. We've been talking a lot about students and parents tonight, but thank you for asking the question, because the staff that walks into our schools are the next most important constituency, and they have to trust that you, the board, and we, the leadership team, have thought about everything we could possibly think about, done everything we possibly could have done, and then remained open-minded and listened for the things that we hadn't thought about yet.
Thank you.
Other questions, other comments for Dr. Freeman or for Dr. Crystal or Mr. Bowden?
I'll also remind the board members that most of you are parents and you're welcome to join this meeting tomorrow night as well. Parents of current students is what I meant to say. You're welcome to join us again with your parent hat on.
One area that I've also had some questions about is this issue of bus monitors. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sands. So a couple people have noticed that there's no mention of bus monitors in the report. What we do mention in the plan is we talk about structured seating, we talked about assigned seating, we talked about structured loading and unloading procedures, and we talk about the requirement to wear masks, as well as the fact that both masks and hand sanitizer will be available on buses. If a student shows up and forgot or misplaced his or her mask, they will not be turned away from the bus. They will be provided with a mask. It's our assumption that in the beginning of the school year, at least, we may require bus monitors, a second adult on the bus, to be able to monitor all of those expectations and in fact teach the students those expectations on the buses. We're not sure currently whether that requirement would be necessary all year long. We know that it might not be necessary if we shift to a hybrid model where the density on the buses is reduced immediately by half. And we also have some concerns about our ability just to staff those positions. So rather than saying in the plan that we plan on hiring monitors, we listed all of our expectations. We believe that in order to implement those successfully, monitors may be required or may be beneficial on at least most, if not all, buses. So many of your students will likely see bus monitors on most runs, at least for the beginning of the year. If we can't staff up fully in that area, monitors may have to rotate across multiple buses. And if we shift to the hybrid or for other reasons determine that they're no longer necessary, we didn't want to commit to the permanent presence of a monitor on every bus if we didn't think it was necessary or feasible. But it is our plan for meeting the guidelines that we set forth in the transportation setting. That's a long answer. I could have said, yes, we plan on monitors, but I thought I'd give the longer answer.
Are any of the other districts that you're in touch with planning on testing the teachers on a regular basis?
None that I'm aware of. And in fact, I've had some conversations with Dennis Johnson, our local health official. I received a communication just prior to this meeting starting, actually, asking why the plan does not call for regular and continual testing of both the student population and the teaching staff on either a weekly or bi-weekly schedule. After speaking with Mr. Johnson, it's my understanding that, one, I don't believe that the school has the authority to do that. Remember, we're a public school. We're required to offer every resident of Guilford between the ages of 5 and 18 a free and appropriate public education. The conditions, the medical requirements that currently are set forth for a student to access that right are set in statute, right? So every student is required to have an MMR vaccination unless you have a medical or religious exemption. I don't believe that we locally have the authority to add a medical test that if you refuse to consent to, we can take away your right to a free and public education. The governor may be able to offer us that authority either through an executive order. If the executive order window is extended, the legislature could certainly do it through passing legislation, although nothing like that was considered during this special session. But furthermore, I don't believe that we've got the local capacity to stand up that kind of testing. The logistics and the expense that would be associated with that kind of regular testing on a weekly or bi-weekly model is not built into our budget. I don't know where we would find the staff or the materials. And if every district in the state of Connecticut intended on I think we have 500,000 students who attend school in the state of Connecticut. If we were doing all those students weekly or bi-weekly, I don't think the state of Connecticut or the nation has that kind of capacity. The CDC is not recommending it. Local state authorities are not recommending it. The opening guidelines we received from the state of Connecticut doesn't require it. And again, locally, our local health authority doesn't believe that it is required, allowed, or feasible. I did look into it. We looked into all of those different angles, and I just don't think it's something that's going to be part of our plan. I will mention here that the plan also doesn't call for temperature checks. We do ask parents to check students' temperature every day. We ask employees to check their temperature every day. But current guidance is also suggesting that large-scale temperature checks at the door of each building would be unwieldy and unreliable. And that is no longer being recommended as a reliable screening tool for students entering. And so early on in this process, we were looking at creating temperature checks, both at the buses and at the school doors. That is now no longer being recommended. In fact, the state is recommending against doing that as a screening. We're asking parents to screen at home. We're asking anybody who feels they have any symptoms or is running a fever to stay at home. And as Mr. Bowden referenced, the nurses are preparing in school for how we will respond should a student come down with fever or other symptoms while at school. There is a response that's being put into place for that situation. But we won't be doing temperature screening, and we will not be doing COVID testing on a regular basis. Again, unless conditions at the state or national level change. I would not be adverse to offering it if we were told that the state had capacity and was offering it to every school district and had supports in place to make it logistically feasible. I'd be thrilled if that was the situation.
If 40% of the teaching staff were to say that they didn't feel comfortable coming in, is it realistic to assume we could come up with enough substitutes to open school?
Likely not, no. But we expect that that 40% number will come down. That 40% was asked when teachers received a 1-paragraph, 3-sentence description of what we thought the reopening would look like. Now that we have this full plan, now that we will be meeting with the bargaining groups and talking through the plan, now that we, through Mr. Bowden's HR office, we're reaching out to every individual who did indicate that they think they have one of those conditions. We will talk through what that means, and we will talk through about what the qualifying conditions really mean. And I believe, again, to Mr. Del Ventura's point, that if we have the staff come to understand this plan and appreciate that we're doing everything we can in this plan to make them safe and healthy, I think that that 40% will come down dramatically. Additionally, we may have to be creative. If there are some teachers who simply cannot return because of an unavoidable condition, whether medical or otherwise, we may have to get creative, and the state has allowed for some creativity to do almost reverse distance learning. There may be a situation where a teacher who teaches a very specialized content area is at home, but is providing instruction to students who are in a classroom in one of our buildings. And those students may be supervised by a colleague, a co-teacher, or even a paraprofessional, while the teacher is projected onto a whiteboard to do reverse distance learning. We may have some small number of teachers who we end up having to find alternative assignments for, but I don't expect it'll stay 40%. I think there will be some percentage that need to be covered by long-term substitutes, and we're really hopeful that the number comes down to a level that is manageable for us to be able to find those substitutes. Lacking those substitutes, we would have no choice but to then begin working against ourselves in all of the efforts we've been making to keep class sizes low. I don't know that I mentioned this, but we've been making a number of efforts over the summer to keep class sizes low. We are looking at enrollments on a daily basis. We're looking at staff assignments. We have approved some small increases in FTEs to the high school. The high school is looking at their catalog of offerings and making some really distasteful decisions, but is reducing some of the more ancillary electives so that we can offer more sections of the core requirements, therefore bringing class sizes down. You know, the difficulty would be that a significant percentage of teachers who cannot return that we cannot cover with long-term substitutes would then end up working against us in all of those efforts to keep class size down. So we're hopeful, again, that as teachers become more familiar with the plan, as they have opportunities to hear about the plan, that number comes down dramatically.
Are there other questions, other comments from Board of Ed members tonight?
I just want to say, if I may, we started this meeting by thanking the administrators and the principals and the teachers and the assistant superintendents who led this process. I really do want to thank the board again. We have spent every Monday night pretty much together, the summer, if not for much of the spring and summer. I have talked with many of you multiple times between meetings. I can't tell you how much the leadership team and I know the community appreciates the time that you're giving us to have these conversations in public. I know we're talking together, but the public is watching and they're learning about the plan through these conversations. And I can't remember how many times a plan or an initiative got better because of the conversations that we have with all of you. So again, I know we've thanked everybody who's coming in Monday through Friday to do this work. I want to thank all of you who've been showing up every Monday night to do this work and to support us as we continue the work. It means a lot, and it's making a better product for the children of Guilford.
Well, thank you. It is certainly our pleasure to make sure that kind of we support the administration, that we represent our community and their concerns, and that we be part of this discussion. That being said, it's been mentioned a couple times tonight. I want to again mention to the viewing public that tomorrow evening there will be the opportunity to ask questions about this plan directly. Dr. Freeman, Mr. Bowden, Dr. Crystal and myself will be available tomorrow evening. I also remind the public that that you may email us at any point with questions. You will note on the agendas that my email and Dr. Freeman's email are available. I remind you that all board members have email addresses that are publicly posted on the Guilford Public Schools website, and they are all available to any community member who has a question, concern, comment. We are all part of this discussion. I'm just going to take a pause before asking for an adjournment, just to make sure there aren't any last-minute comments or questions before we end tonight's meeting.
Dr. Balistraci, maybe one more thing, if I could just
Sure.
add for the community, those of you who are planning on attending tomorrow night's town meeting about this plan, my intention is to dispense with the hour-long introduction of the plan. I will simply reference this meeting. This meeting will be recorded and will be archived on our website. The plan itself will exist on the website. We intend to go directly into a question and answer period with the community. Community members will be able to enter their questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and Drs. Balistraci and Crystal and Mr. Bowden and I will all be present to answer your questions about the plan without submitting you to another hour-long explanation of the plan. We will get right into conversation with the community tomorrow evening.
Terrific. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I should know this. Could you remind us, Dr. Freeman, the time of that meeting tomorrow night? Is that at 7 as well?
It is at 7 o'clock tomorrow in a Zoom meeting, and the link is available on our website. It will also be simulcast to YouTube. So if you know that you want to listen but don't want to participate by asking questions through the Q&A, you'll be able to listen on YouTube as well. We do have a cap of 500 participants. We've never hit that cap before. I don't know if we will hit it tomorrow night, but if for any reason you can't log on tomorrow evening to the Zoom meeting, it will be simulcast to our YouTube channel as well. And you can watch on the YouTube channel, although you won't be able to submit questions.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank the viewing public for joining us tonight. I want to thank my colleagues for being here for this special meeting tonight. And again, thank Dr. Freeman, Dr. Crystal, Mr. Bowden, and the Guilford Public Schools faculty and staff for what is really an unbelievable effort to try to plan for this fall. Not only in the task itself, but with ever-changing guidance from the state and information around us. So given that, again, I encourage folks in the community who are interested to join us tomorrow night. And I will now entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Dr. Hirsch? Mrs. Rader? All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening. And this adjourns the meeting for this evening.
Thank you all. Good night.